What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. We'd also like to give a shout out to one of Not Your Average Meta's generous patrons, Martin Stanley, for everything he does to help out the channel. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we're bringing you some brand new decks never played on the channel before, including one of the new Lord of the Rings precon decks. This week's matchup features Patrick playing Fogg's new mono-green Stompy deck being led by Gwenna, Eye of Gaea, Ryan playing the new Food and Fellowship Lord of the Rings precon deck featuring the partner pairing of Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit and Sam, Loyal Attendant, Foggirl playing his new 5-color commander, Tazri, Stalwart Survivor, and Foil bringing back his mono-black Ghoulcaller Gisa deck. Now that we've fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Foil plays a Swamp and pays 1 for a Carrion Feeder. Patrick plays a Forest and then also has a turn in play, casting a Witch's Oven. Ryan plays a tapped Sunpetal Grove while Fogg plays a Plains. Foil plays a second Swamp before paying 2 to cast Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia, and going to combat, hitting Ryan for 1 with his Carrion Feeder. He then goes to his instep, creating a Decayed Zombie token. Patrick draws for turn and plays another Forest before paying 2 for a Mind Stone and passing. Ryan plays a Command Tower for turn and then pays 2 to cast his commander, Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit. Fogg just plays a Survivor's Encampment. Foil draws and then pays 2 for a Knight's Whisper, which has him losing 2 life and drawing 2 cards. He then plays a snow-covered Swamp for turn before going to combat, swings Decayed Zombie at Patrick for 2 damage while he swings his Carrion Feeder at Fogg for 1. His token then gets sacrificed but then gets replaced with another one on his instep. Patrick plays a Force for turn and then taps out to cast his commander, Gwenna. Ryan plays an Exotic Orchard for turn before paying 3 for Rosy Cotton of Southland, which creates him a food token which enters play. This then puts a counter on Frodo and he swings him at Fogg for 2 commander damage. Fogg plays another Plains for turn and then pays to cast a Selesnya Guildmage. Foil plays another Swamp for turn and then pays 4 for an Endless Ranks of the Dead. Patrick plays a Forest and then pays 3 for a Mighty Emergence before he then taps his commander to help cast Pelucranos, World Eater. This then has him untapping his commander and adding a 1/1 counter to her before he then puts counters on Pelucranos. Ryan plays a Necrobloom Snarl for turn, revealing a Swamp from his hand. He then taps out and casts Treebeard, Gracious Host, which has him creating 2 more food tokens and putting 2 more counters on his commander. He then goes to combat and attacks Foil with his commander for Fogg plays a Force for turn and then taps a Selesnya Guildmage to help him cast a Combine Guildmage. On his upkeep, Foil creates a zombie token before he then draws for turn. He then pays to cast a Midnight Reaper and a Foulmoor Knight before passing. Patrick draws for turn and then uses his commander to help him cast an Emperor Crocodile. This then untaps his commander and gives her another counter before he then puts 2 counters on the Crocodile. Patrick then once again taps his commander and his Mind Stone to help him cast a Battle Mammoth, which then untaps his commander once again, giving her another counter while he puts 2 counters on his Battle Mammoth. He then goes to combat swinging Pelucranos at Ryan, who just takes the 7 damage. Ryan plays a Swamp for turn and then pays to cast of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, which has him creating an additional food token and putting a counter on Treebeard. He then also casts a Birds of Paradise before going to combat, swinging his commander at Fogg once again, who just takes the damage. Fogg plays a Mount for turn and then casts a Springleaf Drum before he pays 3 in order to cast his commander, Tazri. He then taps a Springleaf Drum and another creature in order to cast Rin's Resolve, which has him exiling the top 2 cards of his library until his next turn. On his upkeep, Foil creates 2 zombie tokens and then draws for turn. He then plays a Swamp for turn and casts a Tainted Adversary, which enters with 1/1/1 counter and has him creating 2 Decayed Zombie tokens. Patrick draws and then taps his commander to help cast a Gnarled Professor, which has his commander untapping and getting an additional counter while he puts 2 counters on his Gnarled Professor. He then learns by discarding a land card and drawing a card. Patrick then pays the monstrous Pelucranos, which has it fighting Rosy Cotton and Birds of Paradise, sending both of Ryan's creatures to the graveyard. After which he goes to combat, swinging 1 creature at Ryan and 1 creature at Fogg, who both choose to not block and take their damage. On his upkeep, Ryan's Saga triggers, creating another food token before he then draws for turn. Ryan then plays a Plains for turn before paying to cast a Command Sphere, which he floats a mana off before cracking it in order to draw a card. He then pays 3 to cast his other commander, Sam, Loyal Attendant, and creates a food token when he goes to combat. Fogg draws and then plays the Exiled Underground River as his land for turn. He then pays to activate his commander's ability, which has him milling the top 5 cards of his library and putting all creatures with activated abilities into his hand, while the rest of the cards go into his graveyard. Fogg then uses his Springleaf Drum and his Selesnya Guildmage in order to help him cast a Boros Guildmage. On his upkeep, Foil creates 5 more zombie tokens before he then draws for turn. Foil then pays 5 and casts a Noxious Ghoul, before he then decides to sack Jadar to his Carrion Feeder, which has him losing a life and drawing a card, before he puts a counter on the Carrion Feeder. Patrick draws and then plays another forest for turn before paying 4 to cast a Frontier Siege, choosing Cons when it enters play. Patrick then decides to go to combat and swings 2 of his creatures over at Foil, who decides to block both creatures with both of his Death Touch creatures, and in response to damage, Patrick sacrifices one of them to the Witch's Oven in order to create 2 food tokens. Damage then resolves and Foil goes down to 14 life. Ryan draws for turn and then remembers to trigger her Saga, which goes to the last step, creating him 6 1/1 halfling tokens. Ryan then casts a Crypt Incursion, exiling all the creatures out of Foil's graveyard and gaining 6 life. This then adds 6 counters to Treebeard before Ryan pays to crack 4 of his food tokens, gaining 12 more life, which adds 12 more counters onto Treebeard. Ryan then goes to combat, swinging Treebeard at Patrick and Frodo at Fog, which then has him getting tempted by the ring and making Frodo his ring bearer. They both then take their damage and Ryan passes turn. Fog draws for turn, then once again pays to activate his commander, before then paying 3 to generous gift the Noxious Ghoul. In response, Foil chooses to sack the Ghoul to his Carrion Feeder, which gives it an additional counter, before then loses a life and draws a card. On his upkeep, Foil creates 7 zombie tokens before he draws for turn. He then pays to cast Liliana, Dreadhorde General, before he downticks her to have each player sacrifice 2 creatures, while he sacks 2 zombie tokens and draws 2 cards. He then sends 8 of his zombie tokens over at Ryan, who blocks 6 of them with his halflings but still ends up taking 8 damage. Patrick draws for turn and then uses his commander to help cast a Stampeding Sarrow, which then untaps his commander, giving her a counter, while he puts 2 counters on a Stampeding Sarrow. He then pays to crack his Mind Stone to draw a card before passing turn. Ryan draws for turn and then pays 2 life to help cast a Toxic Deluge while X is equal to 2. This then wipes the board of all of Fog's creatures, and in response, Foil sacrifices all of his zombie tokens to his Carrion Feeder in order to add more counters to it and then draw 18 cards. Ryan then plays a Brushlands for turn before sacking the rest of his food tokens to gain more life and add more counters to Treebeard. Ryan then goes to combat, creating another food token which he sacks to gain more life and add more counters to Treebeard. He then swings Frodo at Fog and Treebeard at Foil, which once again has him getting tempted by the ring, which has him drawing a card and discarding a card before it gets taken out by damage. Fog draws for turn and then pays to cast a Cynic Guild Mage and a Karazda Guild Mage, before he then taps his other Guild Mages in order to help him cast a Gruul Guild Mage along with a Legion Guild Mage. Patrick draws for turn and then remembers to bounce his Sarrow back to his hand before he uses his commander to help him cast a Relic Golem, which untaps his commander, adding another counter, before he adds 2 counters to his Golem. He then taps his commander once again to help cast the Stampeding Sarrow, which adds an additional counter to his commander and untaps her, while he then puts 2 counters on the Sarrow. Patrick then plays a land for turn and goes to combat, swinging his commander over Ryan for 11 commander damage. Ryan draws for turn and then pays to cast a Banquet Guest, which enters play with 10 1/1 counters on it. Ryan then goes to combat, creating a food token, sacrificing it right away in order to gain 3 life and add more counters to Treebeard. He then once again goes to combat, swinging Frodo at Fog, which has him getting tempted by the ring, and Treebeard over at Patrick. This once again has him drawing a card and discarding a card, while Fog blocks with the Guild Mage and Patrick blocks with 2 creatures but still gets taken down to 3 life. Fog draws and then casts a Bitter Reunion, which has him discarding a card and drawing 2 cards, before he then plays in a Darkar Waste as his land for turn. He then passes, and on his end step, Patrick pays to sacrifice all of his food in order to gain some life. Patrick then untaps and draws for turn before paying 3 in order to cast a Beast Within in order to destroy Treebeard. Ryan then gets a 3/3 Beast token, and Patrick goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Ryan, who decides to double block with his Banquet Guest and his Beast token, sending Gwenna back to the command zone. Ryan draws for turn and then plays a Swamp, before he swings his entire team over at Patrick, which has Patrick getting taken out of the game while he draws a card and discards a card. On his end step, Fog pays to draw a card and discard a card himself, before he then casts Crash the Party. In response, Ryan exiles one of Fog's Guild Mages with the Swords of Plowshares and has him gaining 2 life and only creating 2 tapped Rhino tokens. Fog then draws for turn and plays a land before paying 2 to cast a Vitu-Ghazi Guild Mage. He then casts his commander a second time before paying to crack his enchantment to give his creatures haste. He then uses his other creatures to help activate his commander's ability, which has a million top 5 cards of his library once again. He then only hits one guild mage before binning the rest of the cards and passing his turn. Ryan draws for turn before he then goes to combat, creating a food token, which he then cracks in order to gain 3 life. This then has him swing his entire team over to Fog and has him getting tempted by the ring a 4th time, which has him drawing a card and discarding a card, while Fog decides to block Frodo with his Rhino token. But before damage is dealt, he flashes in a Grey Oak Guardian, which has him untapping all of his team and giving him +2/+2. This then has Fog getting taken down to 7 life, before he then untaps for turn and draws and realizes he's dead to Ryan with commander damage on his next turn, so he scoops the game up to Ryan. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.